Welcome to a Mythology Matters, where ancient narratives unfold a profound connection between history, mythology, and theology. Boogeyman hides in darkness. Welcome to a descent into the dark. Tonight, we explore the Boogeyman, a name whispered across centuries, now catalogued within the shadowed pages of the Infernal Dictionary. He is the ultimate primordial stalker, a creature that transcends folklore to exist in the very absence of light, while other demons claim thrones or regions. The Boogeyman claims the corner of your eye and the space beneath your bed. He is a personification of the void, feeding on the vulnerability of the unprotected. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of the abyss. Keep your light bright and your eyes open. Chapter 1. The weight of the unseen. The closed door did not creak. It singed. It was a soft, exhaling sound, like a lung finally collapsing under the weight of a secret. 10-year-old Leo sat frozen in bed. His clit pulled up the bridge of his nose. The fabric was a thin barricade of cotton and polyester, a shield that felt increasingly transparent against the encroaching gloom. In the suburban silence of Oakhaven, the world was supposed to be governed by the hum of refrigerator and the distant, comforting rush of the interstate. But tonight, the silence was heavy, pressurized by something that refused to be silent in return. In the corner of his room, the darkness was doing something darkness should not do. It was sickening. Usual shadows were passive. They were mere the absence of light, the negative space left behind by his desk lamp, or the glow of the hallway. But this shadow had a texture. It looked oily and undulating with a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to drink the faint, reassuring glow of the Stegosaurus nightlight. "Dad," Leo whispered. "Dad?" Leo whispered. His voice felt thin, brittle as dry parchment, and it was easily swallowed by corners of the room. There was no answer from across the hall, only the rhythmic, heavy thrum of his own heart. It felt less like a vital organ and more like a warning bell, vibrating against his limbs with a frantic, uneven cadence. He watched the sliver of blackness between the closet door and the frame. He expected a crow, perhaps all glowing yellow eye, the classic jagged tropes of the scurried legends. Instead, he saw a movement that defied the law of geometry, a rim longer than a human arm and draped in what looked like a tattered, wet smoke reached out and blashed the carpet. There was no sound of impact, no thud, no lasso. It was a phantom touch, a vibration that Leo felt in his teeth rather than his ears. It was the feeling of a cold needle dragging across the surface of a drum. The Boogeyman was not a monster of flesh and bone. It was a predator of the concept of the safety. It fed on the precise moment when a child realizes that walls are just drywall, that locks are just metal, and that the adults in the next room are just tall children who are also afraid of things they cannot name. The entity slid further into the room. It did not walk. It unfolded. It was she-out that refused to be defined, shifting its mass like a mercury poured into a flat surface. One moment it was jagged, spying the man. The next it was hunched, mouth-limbed beast that seemed to have too many joints. As it neared the foot of the bed, the temperature in the room plummeted. The warmth of radiator was stripped away, replaced by an air that tasted of a copper, ozone, and old damp earth, the smell of a cellar that had not been opened in a century. Leo squeezed his eyes shut. A stinging tear escaped, tracing a hot path down his temple. If I can't see it, it is not real. If I can't see it, it can't see me. If I was a lie, he knew it. The darkness did not need eyes to see. It had a sense for the heat of fear. It felt the mattress deep. It wasn't the heavy weight of person sitting down, but subtle, localized pressure, as if the air itself had become incredibly dense at the foot of his bed. The Stegosaurus nightlight flickered. The plastic glowed sickly green before dying out entirely. Now, the room was a total void. Leo's breeze came in a swallow, jagged hitches. He tried to count to 10, a trick his mother taught him for anxiety, but the numbers dissolved in his mind. 1, 2, 3. A cold dry breath tinkled his forehead. It did not smell like a breath. It smelled like the vacuum of space, cold and devoid of life. He could feel the proximity of the thing now. It was leaning over him, hovering just inches from his face. He could feel the static of its presence, a prickling sensation of his skin, like the approach of lightning strike. I can see you, a voice rasped. It was not a voice produced by vocal cords. It was the sound of dry leaves skittering across grave, the sound of knife edge being drawn over silk. It was a sound that existed in the back of his skull, vibrating his marrow. And I have been waiting, the voice continued, for the right of fail. You thought the bulb would save you. Light is just a temporary delay. Darkness is a default. Darkness is a home you forgot you had. Leo wanted to scream, but his throat had turned to glass. He felt a long, spindly finger cold as an ice pressed gently against his lips. It was not a threat of violence. It was a command for silence, a secret shared between the hunter and the prey. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights sweeping across the window. For a fraction of a second, the room was illuminated. Leo's eye flew open. He expected to see the monster caught in the glare. But there was nothing. No man, no beast, no smoke. Just as his heart began to slow, the light passed and the room plunged back into shadow. In that instant of returning blackness, the pressure on his lips intensified. Don't look for the light, Leo, the rasp whispered. Closer now. right against his ear, and much easier to see when you stop trying. The closed door singed again, and the weight on the bed vanished. But as Leo lay there staring into the dark, he realized the room was not empty. The boogeyman had not left. It had simply dissolved into the air he was breathing. Every inhale was a piece of the monster entering his lungs. Every exhale was a prayer for the sun. He stayed awake until the sky turned bluish, grayish purple. He did not move a muscle. He had learned the first rule of the dark. The boogeyman does not hide in the shadow. He is the shadow, and the shadow never truly leaves the room. Analysis of chapter 1. The narrative structure of this chapter focuses on sensory subvision. Atmospheric pressure, by describing the darkness of sickening and having weight, we have moved the boogeyman from a visual threat to physical one. This exploits the psychological phenomenon of hypnagogic hallucination, where the sleeper feels a presence in the room. The nightlight symbolism, the failure of the light, is not just technical glitch. It is a symbolic defeat of childhood innocence. The nightlight represents the fire of the ancestor, and its death marks the turn of primal state of vulnerability. Audiovisual dissonance, the creature's voice being scattering leaves and its movement being geometric defiance, taps onto the uncanny valley. It is scary because it almost fits into our world, but the physics of its existence are fundamentally broken. Chapter 2. The anatomy of abyss. Morning did not bring the usual relief. Though the sun painted the walls in cheerful shades of butter yellow, the corner of the room felt long. The closet door was shut neatly, perfectly shut. But the air around remained stagnant, a packet of atmospheric dread that refused to dissipate. It was as if the darkness had left a stain of the reality of the room, a bruise of the fabric of the day. Leo sat at the kitchen table, pushing a soggy Cheerio around his bowl. His mother was humming a pop song from the radio, obliviously packing a lunch that he knew he would not eat. Her movements were sharp and rhythmic, grounded in the world of chores and schedules. How could he explain to her that the darkness had spoken, that it had weight? To her, the closet was a place for winter coats and board games. To Leo, it was a portal to dimension that it did not follow the rules of the sun. To understand the boogeyman, to truly perform an anatomy of this abyss, one must understand the survival of the shadow. Archetypally, this entity represents the primal fear of the unknown. He is the great predator that haunted our ancestors before we had fire to push back the night. We haven't outgrown him. We have only built better bulbs to hide from him. The mechanics of Boogeyman. The entity Leo encountered is not biological organism. It is manifestation of liminal energy. It exists in the in-between. Attribute manifestation, psychological, impact visibility, peripheral, partial. It is rarely seen head-on, preferring the corners of the eye where the retina's rod cells are more sensitive to motion but less to detail. Triggers chronic hypervigilance, the victim begins to distrust their own vision, leading to a breakdown in sensory certainty, form amorphous mimicry. It lacks a true shape. It takes the form of whatever the observer fears most, or whatever fits the geometry of the room. Create a personalized terror. The boogeyman is not just a monster, it is your monster, tailored to your specific psyche, auditory, subsonic mimicry. It uses sounds that bypass the ear and go straight to the brainstem. The sound of a settling house, a scratching branch, or a loved one's voice disrupts the victim's sense of spatial reality. You hear him behind you, but the sound originates from within your own mind. Environment darkness, confined spaces. It requires a low-photon environment to maintain molecular cohesion. Exploits the vulnerability of sleep and isolation. It turns the home, the sanctuary, into hunting ground. The physics of the void. If you analyze the boogeyman through a theoretical lens, its presence suggests disruption in local thermodynamics. When Leo felt the temperature drop, he was witnessing the entropy of presence. The entity acts as a thermal sink. They manifest in our 3-dimensional space. It must draw energy from its surroundings. As Leo walked to school, he noticed the shadows of the oak tree lining the sidewalk. They seemed too long for the hour, stretched thin like pulled taffy. They danced with a frantic, junky energy that did not match the gentle morning breeze. He realized then that the boogeyman hadn't stayed in his closet. It wasn't tethered to a piece of furniture. It had simply transitioned. The boogeyman is not resident of house. It is resident of the darkness itself. It is a global passenger moving through interconnected shadows of the world like a shark through an endless black ocean. Every shadow is a tunnel. Every dark corner is a doorway. When Leo entered the school all away, the fluorescent light flickered, a common occurrence in the hugging building. But for Leo, it was a heartbeat of pure terror. For a microsecond, the hallway plunged into black. In that heartbeat of darkness, he saw him. The figure was standing at the end of the row of lockers. It was tall, impossibly thin. Its limbs elongated like the shadows of a tree outside. It wore the suggestion on shoot, but the fabric seemed to be made of soot and static. It had no face, only smooth, pale surface where fuchsias should be. Like a thumbprint thrust over clay, as the light struggled to return, the figure tipped an imaginary hat, a gesture of mocking brightness. The light returned with ham and booze. The figure was gone, but the locker door where he had stood was now slightly ajar. Exhaling that same cold sigh Leo had the night before. His eternal neighbor. The boogeyman is a universal boogie from the Middle English bog, meaning the frightening spectre. Whether called the Batsman in German, the Coco in Spain, or the Baba Yaga in Slavic lore, the lore remains. He is the reminder that we are not the masters of the night. Psychologically, he is the shadow self, described by Carl Jung, the parts of ourselves we hide in the dark. But for Leo, The anatomy of the abyss was much simpler. It was the realization that the sun is just temporary reprieve. We live on a speck of light floating in infinite ocean of black. The boogeyman doesn't hate us. Hate is a human emotion. The boogeyman simply is the darkness waiting for the battery to die, the candle to flicker, and the eyes to close. As Leo sat in his first period class, he did not look at the teacher. He looked at the shadow beneath his own desk, watching it as it began to stretch, reaching slowly toward his shoes. The abyss was not under his bed anymore. It was everywhere. As we close the heavy vellum of the Infernal Dictionary, remember that the boogeyman is more than a bedtime warning. He is eternal resident of the unlit world. He reminds us unchanged and ever patient. Whether it is a trick of the mind or a dweller in the deep, he ensures we never truly outgrow our fear of the shadow. Thank you for braving the gloom with me today.